own a DSLR because you're looking for the best image quality possible in an affordable package, and they offer it. But some of you who have moved up from super zooms, you miss that huge range offered. The kit lens 18 to 55 is really just a 3x lens, and the 18 to 135 and 18 to 140 from Canon and Nikon respectively is just about a 7.5, 8x zoom. Not a huge range. Tamron has decided to fix that for you, and they're not the first, but they are the first that's offering a lens with a range from 16 to 300, and that's what this does right here. So you have incredible convenience in this fairly lightweight and portable package. What are you paying for that? Well, obviously, you are actually paying money. This retails for about $630 here in the US, but are you paying in any way else? Say, for instance, your image quality. Well, let's take a look. We're going to run through a handful of comparison shots of the 16 to 300 versus something like the Canon 18 to 135. I was curious how a standard kind of kit lens from Canon would compare against something that costs a good bit more, offers a good bit more range, but as I often say, you make some sacrifices when you're cramming more range into a camera. One of those sacrifices you're making is distortion, and you can see that here. Shot at 16 millimeters, the side of this old mill, you can see this distinctive bowing or bending in the roof of the building. Kind of if you notice, just this whole area is bulging out, and this was flat to the camera or perpendicular to the camera. Now, something like that is actually quite correctable in Lightroom, but it is something that you see in these lenses that have a much larger focal length crammed into a single lens. You can come down here to enable profile correction in Lightroom in the develop module. Now nothing happens because this lens is new enough that Lightroom right now doesn't have a profile for it. But we can come down and say, hey, it's the Tamron, and then it will pick up the 18 to 200. It says, hey, this is pretty close. I'm going to guess that this is what you're shooting with, and that bowing is gone. Yes, there is some slight warping in the image, but at this level of detail, it's virtually impossible to see. So, pretty much fixed. Not bad. Let's go back to the library. Now, I shot a series of images. We're just going to look at a handful that are representative of the quality I was getting. And the first one we're going to jump right into here and make a comparison is the Tamron at 50 millimeters f5 versus the Canon kit lens 18 to 135 STM, also at f5. And from this distance and this small screen, you can't tell that there's anything different going on. The area of focus was this little bit of darker bricks right here, and that was consistent through all of these shots. And here we are at 50 f5, 100% view, so we're pixel peeping, and you may see a little bit more detail over here on this side, but at this distance and this focal length, the two are pretty close, pretty similar. And we can go up to the corners, and we don't quite get in the corner there, so it wasn't quite lined up perfectly. But again, little soft here, a little bit more detail, but no real difference between the two of them significant. Now in this case, this looks a little sharper to me, and this looks a little softer in the corner. The Canon, again, of course, is on the right, and here we are down here, a little bit sharper over on the right hand side and a little bit softer with the kit lens. Now let's move on to our next comparison. We are now at 50 millimeters again, f8 this time though, so we've stopped down. f5 is the maximum aperture for both of those lenses at 50. And there we go, move it a little bit, lock it in place. And again, certainly now seeing some more detail over here, but let's return over to our right hand side and see what we think. It's pretty close call. Leave a comment down below. What do you think is the sharper side? Tamron on the left, Canon kit lens on the right, and I think we are going to call that a draw. Maybe the Tamron is just a tiny bit sharper in that corner, but up here in the bricks, noticing a little bit more washed out detail. Let's move on to our next comparison. We are now at 70 millimeters, and we're really starting to be able to see some nice detail in the brickwork, and here we can see a pretty significant difference between the Tamron on the left and the Canon kit lens on the right. Let's go up to our left hand corner. And we can really see the staining on the brick here is pretty smudgy, and over here we can make out the individual details of that. And let's move over to the right hand side. We look like we have a sharper on the right, and let's move down to that. Oh, that wasn't the right, that was the middle. And here we go. Still looks like the Tamron. I need to have my Canon kit lens checked in the bottom right corner here. It seems to be a little out of whack, whereas the Tamron is pulling it out quite nicely. Here we are again at 70 millimeters, f8 this time, f8, and again center focus. Let's go over to that right corner and see how we're doing. It does seem now that we have sharper in that right corner at f8. Let's go up to the left corner. Let's travel across the screen, and we can see a difference up here as well, although it doesn't seem, and that should be expected at f8. Really, aperture is a great equalizer, and shooting at something like f8 is going to bring those in line. Now at 70 millimeters, or 69, we're very close to 70. Now at 70 millimeters, I thought I'd bring in another lens, and I have the 70-300 available to me. This is the 70-300 f4 to f5.6 IS-USM. I wouldn't call it a budget zoom. That's the 55 to 250 STM and older versions, but it certainly is a good value zoom, and it's quite a sharp lens at some focal lengths. So here we are at f8 again. Quite the equalizer, the aperture. Earlier apertures I saw a clear winner in the 70-300, but at f8 you can still see that the 70-300 on the right is sharper, but the 16-300 still does a decent job. If you've got enough light and you're shooting with this lens, it really isn't too bad. And again here, a little bit of smudge in that detail. Let's go over to our top right corner. Definitely a little bit softer in the corner, and we come down to our propane gas meter here, and we can see that 70-300 is a good bit sharper. But we're talking about a 3x zoom lens versus an 18x zoom lens. Now let's step it up a little bit more. Now we have the Tamron 16-300 on the left and the Canon 70-300 on the right. And I actually didn't quite believe these results, but then went and shot a bunch more and found this to be true. This is one of the dangers of listening to internet reviews, or any reviews really, where one lens is compared to another. If the person is only comparing one lens to one other lens, you don't know what the condition necessarily is. Now, I believed my 70-300 to be in quite good condition. I've been happy with it for many years, but you can see that clearly at 200 millimeters, the Tamron on the left is far, far sharper than the 70-300. 70-300 is quite soft. All of these tests were done multiple times, and as I said, I didn't quite believe these results, so I went and shot a bunch more test results, and consistently the Tamron at 200 beat my copy of the 70-300, and we're going to see that when we go up to 300 as well. Here we are now at 300, and the Tamron has switched to the right. Let me flop those. There we go. Keep it consistent. The Tamron is on the left, and the 70-300 is on the right. We're shooting at f8. Again, should be quite an equalizer, but we have a good bit of detail here. So let's put aside the fact that we're comparing lenses for a second and just talk about the Tamron. This is a nice detail here at 300 millimeters. It really has done a good job, and we can move all the way over to the corner, and it is pretty consistently sharp. Now, one thing that I haven't talked about that I have noticed with this lens is in some areas you do get a good bit of chromatic aberration. See this between this bright and dark, you have this purple fringe. That is called chromatic aberration, and lenses with large focal lengths or cheaper lenses often have trouble with chromatic aberration, and this lens does. So you want to avoid shooting in these kind of high contrast situations if you can, or stopping down a little bit. The wider the lens, the wider the aperture, the more pronounced or noticeable the chromatic aberration was. I shot a few more test subjects versus when I realized that the 70 to 300 really wasn't cutting it at 200 and 300. I pulled out my 70 to 200 f2.8 LIS Mark II USM lens. And at f6.3 and at f8, the Tamron really did hold its own against that $2,000 lens. So I'm very impressed as a decent telephoto. Now you are limited at that upper range to f6.3, so you're going to need good light. Let's look at a couple of portraits real quick I shot, or actually Christina shot of me. Here we are. This is the Tamron at 50 millimeters f5, and you know, that is the widest aperture available to that lens, and certainly not blurring the background too much, but you could shoot at a higher focal length and a narrower aperture even, and get a little bit more background. But for our distance here, this was working well for us. And good detail. Let's move in. Now this is with the 18 to 135, and we really don't see much difference in the background bokeh at f5. They're all going to be about the same, and that is to say, not that out of focus. And then here we have the 50 millimeter f1.4 also at f5. Now they all look pretty good to me. Good detail, good color, good contrast. The 51.4 actually looks just a little bit flatter in that case. If we zoom in and stare at my face for just a minute or two, we can see that we've got good detail here. You can see some of the pores in my face. And with the 18 to 135, those are gone. We're not seeing those, so we're getting just a little bit softer at 50 in this case. And now the 51.4, you can see that they're back. So it's just showing you that it does a decent job as a portrait lens, and we'll talk more about this in a second, but you can certainly get really nice blurred backgrounds when you're shooting at longer focal lengths, and you'll be forced to shoot at f6.3 as I said, but you can start to control for some background blur there. Let me tell you what I do like about this lens. I already mentioned briefly that it is a nice size, compact, nice weight for a huge range. And as you see, you are going to be making some sacrifices. You need to decide if those sacrifices are worth it to you. But being able to start at 16 millimeters instead of your typical 18, that's a fairly significant difference. You can see here, 16 millimeter example versus 18 millimeter example. One of the other things that I like about this lens is its macro capabilities. Now please don't mistake that for me saying that this is a macro lens. But for a lens that already crams in so much focal length, it also does a decent job of getting you fairly close. That coupled with the vibration compensation, as Tamron calls it, or image stabilization, vibration reduction, whatever your camera manufacturer calls it, gives you some decent hand-holding abilities in low light levels or macro shots where you really want that small depth of field, and so you need to let in a lot of light via shutter speed. It gives you some stabilization.
Well, we just looked at this. This is a great example of a macro shot. I would not call this a macro lens, but here we are at 300 millimeters, f6.3, 250th of a second, and handheld without any issue. And we can zoom in and say we have nice detail along this edge here and those drops there. I'm really happy with this picture. It has been cropped to square, but it has not been cropped in at all. We have a couple other macro shots to use as an example. Here is a car roof or car hood after some rain. You can see the bits of the pollen, and we can go in and we can really get the detail in those pollen. Again, we're down to 1/200th of a second handheld, and it did quite a nice job as well. We've got some bleeding hearts, 160th of a second. And again here as well, and one more all the way out at 300 millimeters and 200th of a second, which we've seen already. So it was quite fun to walk around with this lens and be able to get macro shots like these, and then turn around and shoot something at a great distance.
I also say I have to like the build quality with one exception. I mean, it feels good in the hand. It feels nicely put together the way the rubber is integrated with the lens itself. My one complaint though is it's not necessarily so smooth to zoom from 16 to 300. It doesn't feel even in friction across that range, but I have noticed in just the short weekend that I've been using it, it's already starting to feel better. When I pulled it out of the box new, it certainly was more sticky in some places. So I expect that to get better over time. You do have to worry a little bit about lens creep if it's going to get much looser. I haven't noticed anything of that sort yet, but this lens is still quite new. So the question is this a good value lens? And the answer completely lies with how much you value convenience. If you're willing to make some image quality sacrifices, and I don't think there are a ton that you have to make for this, it certainly provides a huge range. It does so decently with nice macro capabilities in a nicely sized package that doesn't require you to switch lenses. That was a mouthful, but I wanted to make sure that point got across. If image quality is the ultimate of importance to you, then you probably don't want to look at this lens, and you want to keep the lenses that you're buying to those shorter focal lengths that make less sacrifices. I hope this was helpful. If you want any kind of more thoughts, you want to share some opinions with me on focal lengths that are this large, do you value that? Leave a comment right down below, or even better, come on over to Facebook, a nice page that I manage with lots of tips, tricks, deals published frequently that help you become a better photographer, help you save money, making sure you're not wasting your money when you're looking for new gear. There's a link right down below to that, and I also run a blog. All those links are right down below. Take a look, and if you're interested in buying this, I suggest B&H. They're the first link to buy from right down below. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe.
And now if we want to look at the ability to go from 16 to 300, so this tree here in the distance, and now we could see if there was a bird sitting up in one of those dead branches. It is a pretty impressive focal length. One of the very earliest shots I did down on the Connecticut River, I just was playing around and just started to zoom and take pictures, and it was right about in this shot that I noticed that there was some duck or merganser or cormorant of some sort out there in the water. And so being able to go from this scenic shot to something of a wildlife type shot is really impressive. Good detail. Again, this is just shots around town, out in the country. Nice detail on the snout of this cow or nose. And one final example of the significant range offered by this lens. Here we have a view at 16 millimeters out across this. One final example of the significant range of this lens. If you want to see this complete playthrough, I put up a quick video on Instagram. There's a link right down below. I actually used the Canon 10-18 to start, so it is impressive. But here we are. Keep your eye. What we're going to do is we're going to jump to those rocks right up there on that distant hillside. And if I click one to the right, there they are. So again, no cropping there. This is simply shot straight out of the camera, 16 300.